Hi, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to welcome my colleague at the Global Quran Project, the University of Freiburg, Mykhaylo Yakubovych. He's currently involved in research on the Qur'an translations produced by the King Fahd Complex for the printing of the Holy Qur'an. And he specifically focuses on Central Asian and Eastern European languages. In terms of his background, he has previously conducted several academic projects on the Islamic manuscript heritage, starting from the post-classical intellectual history of the Crimean Khanate at Princeton, USA, and finishing with 16th to 17th century Quranic interpretations among Lithuanian Tatars. As well as all this research background, Mykhaylo is also a practitioner in the field, as he is the author of an annotated translation of the Quran into Ukrainian. And he's going to be speaking to us today about state-supported tafsir and its impact on Quran translation, the case of the Saudi Al-Muyassar. So without further ado, I pass over to Mykhaylo.
Thank you so much, dear Sohaib, and thank you, dear organizers, for inviting me for that talk. And just one moment, I will activate my presentation. I hope everyone see what is going on. Yeah? Can you see my presentation now?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, so I will start. And what I will talk today about is state-supported tafsir and its impact on a Quran translation, the case of Saudi Al-Muyassar. First of all, we have a lot of contemporary tafsirs in most of the published in many Arabic countries, and one of the most important actors is King Fahd Quran Printing Complex in Saudi Arabia, which is usually publishing not only translations of the Quran, but also many other stuff related to ulum al-Quran, the sciences of Quran, and the tafsirs among all of those issues. But what I would like to talk about, starting from the name, Tafsir Al-Muyassar. What is Tafsir Al-Muyassar actually? Why do we have such a concept in contemporary Islamic studies, and especially Quranic studies, as Tafsir Al-Muyassar? So I was browsing into the many titles of tafsirs published by the 20th century and the beginning of 21st century. So we see there really quite a big number of commentaries with a name made from this verb. So we have Taysir, Muyassar, Tafsir, Aysar, or Al-Muyassar. We have different schools of Islamic thought. Here are different mazhabs. We have, for example, a tafsir by Muhammad at-Fayyash. This is an Ibadi tafsir actually written in North Africa. And we have, of course, some Salafi tafsirs like Taysir al-Latif al-Manan by Abdurrahman al-Sadi. And the same is about As-Sabuni, Ali Muhammad, well-known scholar, and Jazairi al-Mubakr. So we have a number of works written with this name, Taysir or Tafsir. Of course, there are some other works. This list is quite a limited one. But when comparing to the Quranic commentaries written in 16th, 15th century, or even before in Middle Ages, there are no many really number of works with the name Taysir al-Muyassar. There are some, but this concept in some ways a modern concept. Why does this concept is modern? Some of the commentaries can explain that. This is the commentary by Abu Bakr al-Jazairi, one of the quite renewed Salafi authorities from Algeria, from North Africa. And we see that he says that I'm often asked by the listeners of my tafsir lessons in the Prophet Mosque being in Medina in Saudi Arabia, that this should be a tafsir, easy in the expression and simple in the meanings. So this is like a simplified or light version of tafsir available for the public. So this is a desirable commentary, and for some scholars, in order to catch the meaning for Ammatun Nas, like the ordinary people can understand the Quran well. The same we see from Ali Muhammad al-Sabuni. He says that tafsir is a simple expression and clear meaning. So what means simple expression and clear meaning? This is probably the language, that it should not be really the scientific or academic language, that it must be simple, and this is quite accessible to the public. And so we see this concept related to reformist strategy of many schools of thought in Islam, and especially this trend is quite popular for present-day Salafi Muslims because of going with a re-Islamization strategy, like propagating the correction of the creed through the means of the real understanding what the Quran is and what the tafsir is. And in this context, we have quite an interesting development produced in Saudi Arabia in Mujamma al-Malik Fahd, King Fahd Quran printing complex, called Tafsir Al-Muyassar. So first published in 1998, 1999. This work has been written by a number of scholars, but if you will look through the cover of book, you will read Nukhbat al-Ulama, so like a selected scholars, the best scholars from, and with some of the formal introductions. The people behind this work were Sheikh Hazim Haidar from Islamic University of Medina, and also scholars of tafsir, mostly associated with this university. So this university is usually like a kind of think tank for King Fahd Quran printing complex, related quite closely in Medina. So they have a lot of cooperation projects, especially translations, academic work, and so on. So it is not surprising that this work has been produced with the affiliates of this university. The second and revised edition appeared just in, you see how many years passed, actually in 15 years. And the most recent edition, it is just 2 years ago. And it seems to be that there are some other, but there are no more than off prints, so new, the same version published just for because of the lack of copies. So they need all the time new copies and just republishing the previous edition sometimes. What do we have in this tafsir? This is a tafsir structure. It's quite simple. So we have Mushaf al-Madinatul Nabawiyya, the Quran printed in Medina, in boxes, in special boxes, and from the right or from the left side, depending on the page, there are a commentary in Arabic. There are quite a simple commentary, like a paraphrase, so it completely fits into the concept of Muyassar, the simplified or a light version of the tafsir, just to be available for the community in general, not only for scholars or for studying in some madrasa. And we have some interesting stuff happening with this commentary, because quite a good question whether any new editions are being revised, or they are revised completely, or probably they are the same one, just with a small changes, because there are introduction to the first edition, introduction to the second edition. I don't want to go into many details, but in general, maybe 95 or 99% of all the editions are the same one. But we see quite an interesting case that in first edition, in a commentary related to Surah Al-Fatiha, to the last verses, غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ and وَلَا ضَالِّينَ. So we have a commentary over who are the people with the breath of God, and who are the people who are being in error. So we have a traditional commentary in the first edition, the Hum al-Yahud, so meaning the Jews, and that those who are in error, they are Christians. But for the second edition, and officially available online, we see a complete lack of those questions. So no mentions of Jews and Christians. In this way, the second edition of commentary over the Surah Al-Fatiha seems to be like more tolerant, or fitting into religious tolerance strategy, probably not going into such a deep discussion with Jews and Christians. So there are some changes could be made for political reasons. But what we have even more interesting, that in some of the next editions, still the King Fahd Quran Printing Complex is publishing, we have the Jews and Christians once again. And there are rather complicated issues. So online we have a version without that, but some printed copies, even printed after the second edition is being done, still they have this mention of Jews and Christians. So what is the final opinion in that? This is a open question. And just going into the futures of this tafsir, that what was the reason behind writing, and this is like a quotation from the introduction to the first edition, that there was an urgent need in this era to develop a brief tafsir and so on. Is planning is a way that make the hearts confident and present the interpretation in a brief and easy phrase. Yeah, it's probably too literal translation into English, not so clear, but still this is the idea is the same, to make the tafsir available and what is already written على المنهج السلف الصالح, so fitting into the methodology of writers predecessors, like a traditional Salafi scholarship often makes on this point. And main principles or main sources of tafsir we see here are the tafsir by Tabari, the tafsir by Ibn Qasir, and also we see here a mention of Ibn Taymiyyah, because he wrote such and such words on At-Tabari, and of course Al-Baghawi. So those three tafsirs they mention here is not a kind of coincidence. Even if someone will browse into the translations published by King Fahd Quran Printing Complex, one could find that most of the translations refer to those three commentaries. So those three commentaries considered to be like a kind of present-day Salafi canon of books, of tafsir books, sometimes adding also the tafsir by Abdurrahman as-Saadi. Yeah, so it's also quite an inviting thing here. And there are also another principles and sources of writing. I will not go into any details here because my study is related mostly to the influence on the translations, but we see there one of the final points that the author of this commentary observes that this interpretation will be translated into different languages and thus avoids mentioning those terms that cannot be translated. This is quite a crucial point. So this commentary is written not only as a commentary, but it fits into the present-day Salafi concept of translation of the Quran, or translation of the meanings of the Quran, like approaching the Quran in some meanings that could have like a traces of the meanings, or just being a kind of interpretation. And we see that this tafsir is especially designed to be available for the interpreters, and it can be used both separately as a book to be translated fully from one language, from the Arabic into any other language, and it can be used like a guide for translating the Quran. And we will see in the course of my presentation how this tafsir is used, and is this goal is really approached, that they can, that the author of tafsir were writing that we may avoid the terms which cannot be translated, but the languages are different, the concept, the semantic structure, everything is different in every language. And is it possible to make such a generalization? That's also a question, and the reality will show the answer behind that. So the next point, and I would like to address a few translations published first of all by King Fahd Quran Printing Complex. This is a translation of the Quran into Zaboni Tojiki, into Tajik language, made by Hujamir Hujamirov. This is a translation produced especially for King Fahd Quran Printing Complex. Just around 8 years ago, it appeared from King Fahd Quran Printing Complex. And we have, in the very introduction, there are Tajik using Cyrillic letters, that one of the main sources was Tafsir Al-Muyassar. So Tafsir Al-Muyassar, and this part of the introduction in a red box, there contains a kind of information what the Tafsir Al-Muyassar is and why it is so important. That this is made under the Ministry of Islamic Affairs in Saudi Arabia and published by King Fahd Quran Printing Complex. So Tafsir Al-Muyassar was the main source for translation. And when going into the very text of translation, so this is the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, and from the right side you see the Arabic text, from the left side you see the Tajik text, and comparing both languages, even not reading Tajik, you see the size of the text from the left side and the side of the text from the right side. So obviously this is a commentary, this is a kind of paraphrase. You don't see any brackets here like insertions or something like that. So this is a paraphrase. Why? Because the main source was Tafsir Al-Muyassar. So this is like the very Quranic text in Arabic and Tafsir Al-Muyassar from the left side. But there are also some footnotes, like a small commentaries with a reference to other tafsirs, and those tafsirs are Al-Baghawi, Al-Tabari, and Ibn Qasir, quite awaitingly as well. Another translation also appeared. This is a translation into Tagalog language. I'm not so qualified in Tagalog, but still the same stuff can be observed in this translation, that this is a translation of Tafsir Al-Muyassar. And thirdly, this is also a new translation into Kiswahili or Swahili, al-Lughat al-Swahiliya. And when going inside, we will see the same approach used by the translator in the Tajik language. So during the last 15 years, King Fahd Quran Printing Complex made 3 new translations, because Tajik, Kiswahili, and Tagalog, quite some of the translations existed before, of course. And all of those 3 translations, are made on the basis of Tafsir Al-Muyassar. So this shows the growing importance of this tafsir into the field of translations made by King Fahd Quran Printing Complex. But not only this institution. Here we have one of the modern translations into Russian. This is a Quran translated by Abu Adel. This is a pseudonym. I will not reveal the real name because the translator usually hides it. And in the very introduction to this translation, published in Russia, in Ukraine, recently in Moldova, and I think somewhere in Central Asia as well, it is written that the basis for this interpretation was At-Tafsir Al-Muyassar, simplified tafsir corresponding to the creed of the first righteous generations of believers. So here we also have that this translation from Arabic into Russian was made with the usage of At-Tafsir Al-Muyassar. Of course, this is a translation made in a Salafi context and extremely popular among the Russian-speaking followers of Salafi Islam. Even the previous translation made by Elmir Kuliyev and published probably 40 times, around 40 editions. I mean, editions like printed around 40 times with the 3 editions and recently the 3rd one. So it is this like overshadowing the popularity of Kuliyev, because this new translation seems to be like 100% Salafi for many of the followers of this Islamic school. And we see there are the basic text and additions in blue color. All of them correspond to the Tafsir Al-Muyassar, probably the 2nd or 3rd edition, because we don't see this controversial issue located on the last verse of Surah Al-Fatiha. And also 2 more developments. There are some website called Tulaiha, someone making a translation of At-Tafsir Al-Muyassar into English. Still, it exists somewhere on the internet and copied and mentioned. Just a few surahs are translated up to now, but the author of translation, probably the translator himself, he said that the project is being continued and there will be a final translation of all Tafsir Al-Muyassar, whole Tafsir Al-Muyassar into the English language. So I'm not sure about any of the credits of the translator, but there are some developments. Someone has an interest in that work. And finally, probably everyone who was interested in dawah or Islamic missionary activities inside Saudi Arabia know this book. This is very popular inside because it's spread among many kind of migrants going into Saudi Arabia. They're from the Philippines, from Pakistan, from other countries. And this is so-called Tafsir Al-Ushra Al-Akhir. This is a tafsir of last tense of the Quran. And it is published by so-called Cooperative Office for Islamic Missionary Activities, like Maktab al-Dawah, and in Riyadh. And they made a translation on a few dozens of languages up to now. So previously they used Zubdat al-Tafsir by Sulaiman al-Ashqar. So this was the base. By some of the new translations are made already from a Tafsir Al-Muyassar. So like this, they started to change the tafsir written by Sulaiman al-Ashqar, Umar Sulaiman al-Ashqar, by the Tafsir Al-Muyassar, like a more canonical, because it's printed by King Fahd Quran Printing Complex. And there are some of the languages, like Ukrainian language, for example, and some of the Central Asian languages now in process of translation. So we have growing number of the languages where the Tafsir Al-Muyassar is a base for, is a main source for translation. Now, what I would like to cover as well is some hermeneutical issues, some issues where we can see the commentary affecting the translation, because there are many interesting features of this commentary, but I would like to show 4 cases for the relation between the translation and commentary. So we have this verse from Surah Al-Qalam, Yawma yukshafu an thaqin, so on the day when the shin is exposed. And there is a point of controversy between some Salafi authorities and some, let it be said, Ash'ari Maturidi Muslims. Why? Because for some commentaries, this verse means that the shin of God will be exposed during this day, day of judgment, day of resurrection. And we see from Tafsir Al-Muyassar that the only interpretation is provided here is a relation to the hadith, that this day God will show his shin. And this tradition is mentioned in Bukhari and Muslim. And when comparing this interpretation with, for example, Tafsir al-Tabari, we see that in Tafsir al-Tabari, this is more kind of metaphorical exegetical strategy, in that this expression means a horror of the day of judgment. This, it should not be read in a literal sense. But of course, there are some early tafsirs, like the one by Abdurrazak as-Sanani, where the tradition ascribed to Ibn Masud is mentioned, that this, the shin of God, is meant under death. But for some of the 20th century Salafi exegetes like Asadi, we see that they used only one approach to that this is definitely about the shin of God as an attribute of God. And how is that? It is not possible to say. So around it, like a face of God, hand of God, we have here a shin of God, like it. So this is the strategy proposed by a Tafsir Al-Muyassar. But what do we see in a translation provided? So we see in the Tajik languages, Kisok Barahna wa Makshuv Gardat. So it's quite clear from this text. There is an Arabic word sok in Tajik. Sok Barahna wa Makshuv Gardat. It means that this day God will show this shin. And Ruzi Kiyomat, it means that there is a day of resurrection, and a commentary made on the basis of the aforementioned hadith. So here we have a translation made completely in the same way as a Tafsir Al-Muyassar says on there. What about the Russian translation? We see that the same когда откроется голень Аллаха, when the shin of Allah will be opened. And but this, we see that the word shin is written as the main text of the verse, but the explanation, shin of Allah, is a kind of insertion of interpolation. So at least here we have a distinction between commentary and between the direct grammatical rendition. But the influence is completely obvious because there is just one meaning provided in both two translations. Another case I would like also to talk about, this is the case of Qul Huwallahu Ahad. This is the well-known surah, Surah Al-Ikhlas. And we see here a theological issue. We see a theological commentary in Tafsir Al-Muyassar, because this theological commentary, this is about the relation of Salafi reading for the Tawhid, for the oneness of God. So we see that they usually divide the oneness of God or Tawhid in those three types. It's the Tawhid of Uluhiyya, Rububiyya, Asma wa Sifat, which can be translated that God is the only one as being God, and He is the one as being a Lord, and He is the one in His nice names and perfect attributes. So we see that all of this is mentioned in Tafsir Al-Muyassar, despite, of course, that theological tradition has been developed in a later period than we have in the Quran. But when comparing this verse from Tafsir Al-Muyassar with Tafsir Al-Sadi, we see generally that they have the same approach. So probably, like in the previous verse, Al-Sadi was the main source for the writers of Tafsir Al-Muyassar, but we see in Tajik translation that Ust Allahi yakto dar uluhiyat, rububiyat, wa asma wa sifat. In translation into Tajik language, we have this three approaches to the God, to Tawhid mentioned. Even in Arabic wordings, uluhiyat, rububiyat, and asma wa sifat. So this is 100%. Everything was written in Tafsir Al-Muyassar. What about the Russian translation? We see that God is the one. He is no the one who can be compared to Him, but generally it doesn't have any idea of Tawhid al-Rububiyyah, al-Uluhiyyah, Asma Sifat. So Russian translation has quite another direction without mentioning this Salafi theology in there. Once again, the verse from Surah Al-Fatiha about the path of those who you have blessed and those who have not near us and those who have gone astray. So we have the first edition of Tafsir Al-Muyassar talking about Jews and about Christians, and in translation into Tajik language, we have Yahudi Yonant, that this is about Jews, and we have Nasrand, this is about Christians. So literal rendition of Tafsir Al-Muyassar, and I'll just to remind that Tajik translation has appeared from King Fahd Quran printing comics. In the Russian translation, there is another rendition. We see that there is the people who are gone astray, for example, but no mention of Jews and Christian, nor in the very text and not in the commentary. It can be different reasons why the translator selected that, but probably he was trying to be as close as to the original text as possible. And moreover, in contemporary, many translations into Russian, they are being quite there is quite a big attention to those translations, because in Russia there are some of the discussions over what is extremism, what is not in the Quranic translation. So one of the translations has been also banned for around few months, and then the court cancelled it. This is a translation of Kuliyev because of being like extremist literature. So maybe this is also made in this context, but I'm not sure. So still, this is the another approach, despite also being dependent from Tafsir Al-Muyassar. So some more cases we have. This is a case of Man fi Sama. This is the verse talking about, do you believe in a God who is in heaven, the one in heaven. And the Arabic expression Man fi Sama, it can be understood in many ways, that the one who is in heaven, or it is something from someone from above. So there are many different variants in tafsirs, but still for the Tafsir Al-Muyassar, they have the very clear vision of that. Allah allazi fawqa sama, the one who is above heavens. So this is a literal reading, also quite closer to the Salafi theology, representing the trend that this God is above heavens, and this kind of fawqiyya and uluhiyya, that his like his exalted nature and his future as being above heavens should be established well, and that this is a literal, it should be literally interpreted. So we have a lot of polemics in this context. So we see even the ending of the verses, وَفِي الْآيَةِ إِثْبَاتَ الْأُلُوَّةِ لِلَّهِ تَعَالَى. So ulwa, like the one who rules over his throne. And in Tajik translation, we have also the same, completely the same translation. So we have commentaries, but not from Tafsir Al-Muyassar, from Tafsir Al-Saidi. Dar oyat uluviyyat Allahu Ta'ala is both shudast. This, all of this verse with the Arabic roots, that this verse is like arguing about the uluviyyat, that the God is being above the throne, above the heaven. So they use this part of the verse for the theological argument. In the Russian translation, we have the same. Кто над небом, the one фوق السماء. And we see here also the trace of this Salafi theological perspective being noticed in this verse. Another case for the relation between Tafsir Al-Muyassar and translation, we have quite an interesting expression, Kama yulik bi jalali. When describing the attributes of God, Tafsir Al-Muyassar usually mention such an expression. This is not this first tafsir talking about that, but the reason behind that is to show that when someone describes the attributes of God and ascribes to God something like a hand or a face and so on, so it should be kept in mind that the reality behind that is such as only God knows. So only like a traditional Salafi creed says about that, the one should believe that God has a hand and should not ask what the hand is. It is commonly bijalal in a way that befits his majesty. So this expression used more 20 times when describing Allah attribute. And we have, it's quite frequent expression in Tajik translation. Also, kiloik bazoti buzurgi, bazoti, when we are talking about his exalted Zalt essence. In the Russian translation, we see the same one, как подобает только его величию. And in Kiswahili translation, also the same meaning is provided. So all those four cases, they show for us the relation between the translation and relation between At-Tafsir Al-Muyassar as a commentary written to the Quran. And we see that for the last 15 years, there is a growing importance of this commentary for most of the translations published, not only published by King Fahd Quran Printing Complex, but also some of the commentaries made somewhere, some of the translations made outside the context of the complex, but probably taking the approach of the complex or the Quranic studies as the main cause. Of course, this is a Salafi tafsir, and I'm not sure if someone will use it in a so extensive way among this, apart from the Salafi communities, maybe just like one of the sources for reference. But we see that the main goal of this tafsir, like being a source or a guide for the next translation provided by King Fahd Quran Printing Complex, this goal is not far from its achievement. And also, we see that this is a kind of maybe going in a few dozens years back, just to perceive the translation of the Quran as a commentary. So it seems to be that the trend of direct translation, of grammatical translation, popular among some Salafis in the 90s, maybe 20 or 30 years ago. So this trend has a kind of crisis now. And this is why some Tafsir Al-Muyassar is a new approach, like providing some commentary, because when working with Quranic translation and the social impact or impact on the readers, even some of the recent studies among the readers asking just a small question: do you want a translation with a lot of commentaries, or you want just a pure text of the Quran without any commentaries? So both Muslims and non-Muslim readers often say that I want some translation with an explanation, because I need this explanation. And also in Salafi community, sometimes talking about the well-known trend that the Quran cannot be translated, the Quran can be approached only within the Arabic languages, and so on. So they depend much on the Arabic text. And here are the reason is why Tafsir Al-Muyassar appeared, that yeah, there is a one good interpretation of every verse. And also we have, when comparing some of the verses, we see that just one reading is provided. So even some controversial Quranic interpretations where we have 5, 6 or more variants of understanding, here we have just a kind of singularity. So this tafsir is quite rising singularity in interpretation, just being addressed for some people who need you look on the Quran as a whole, so like a whole Quran, and this could be Quran made within the correct reading in Salafi understanding of it. Of course, some of the new translations appeared probably will not depend on Tafsir Al-Muyassar, but from my conversation with some people inside the complex recent, I know that also some new translation in preparation into Central Asian languages like the Uzbek one, and some with the North Caucasus languages, the translators used Tafsir Al-Muyassar quite as one of the main sources for the interpretation. And how do other translators will react? How do those translations will be recepted in some communities? That is a question. For example, for Tajik rendition, it is not so popular as another one by Abdurrahman Ayati, made in Iran in the 80s and made from the Persian language, because Tajik is quite close to Persian, but made in Shia context. And of course, this translation is Sunni Salafi context. But still, the trend is going on, and we see how many new translations will appear on. And also the last and important question, will the Tafsir Al-Muyassar remain the same one, or there will be kind of updated version? Because there are a growing number of commentaries also in Saudi Arabia, like a thematical tafsir, and it seems to be that for some of the verses, it cannot be it cannot be really helpful. You cannot know how, even when translating some of the verses, some of the term into some of the language, you cannot find an answer in this tafsir. How to translate the word like Salat, Zakat, even Hajj should be translated literally or rather transliterated, and many other terms could be mentioned as well. So any tafsir can be just sources for all the language, of course, to make terms corresponding to the very original meanings of the Quran. Okay, thank you so much for your attention. I hope at least some of the cases were quite useful and quite illustrative. And if you have any questions, you are most welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mykhaylo. That was indeed a very wide-ranging talk, and I think a lot of the points that you've raised at the end are pertinent things that we might like to ask more about. Before I open up to the wider floor for questions, I'll use my privilege as host to share some thoughts and hear your feedback about it. So I think the factor about tafsīr and the trend that you identified in the modern times of talking about tafsīr is one that deserves some more thought and discussion. And I think that at the end there, you did specify and clarify that to a large extent that is about restricting the range of views to one view. So in a simple sense, that means to say, to make it easier for people, we will tell them that each verse has one meaning. Of course, really, we can question that, whether that really results in ease. I mean, it results in not having to read more than one opinion, but does it result in, let's say, a tafsīr on the ummah, right? Making things easy for people to provide only one meaning under every circumstance. And also, what effect will that have upon people's mindset, not to understand that there is some flexibility even in words of the Quran, and that famously and over many centuries, scholars have been quite open about accepting multiple points of view. Even if they held one view to be the rajih or their preferred view, they would understand that other scholars prefer another view. So it's interesting to me that you're describing their commitment to one thing, which is, according to them, the rajih. And I was just checking into a case study that I was looking into recently about Ibn Taymiyyah and his very unusual take on the verse of qisas in Surah Al-Baqarah. So I looked in the Muyassar just now just to confirm, and they are not following Ibn Taymiyyah in that. So it'd be interesting that although Ibn Taymiyyah is in a sense the highest authority for them, even to tell them what are the good tafsirs, because the list of the 3 tafsirs was derived from, okay, Ibn Taymiyyah said these ones are good, well, except for Ibn Kathir, but Ibn Kathir by his association with Ibn Taymiyyah as well. And yet Ibn Taymiyyah himself goes against those tafsirs and maybe even all tafsirs. So his view, is not rajih, maybe, and is not the one to mention in certain circumstances. So that's the first area which I think I would like some more light on, is this idea of tafsir. And secondly, about producing a commentary for the purpose of translation. So because I've had to I don't have to, I mean, it's my pleasure. I'm involved in translating tafsirs and editing translations of tafsirs. So currently working on Ibn Juzay, which is, again, not muyassar as such, but it is brief in a way that is similar to what you've shown here. And then more extensive works like Ar-Razi, which are full of polyvalence, right? But even some of the shorter tafsirs in the past still give multiple opinions. They just give them quickly and in brief. So, there are 2 main problems that we encounter when trying to think about translating the Quran according to these tafsirs, right? So it seems to me, the way you've described, that the Muyassar, in a sense, has solved these problems to some extent, but I'd like to know whether that problem still exists. So the first problem is indeterminacy, which is to say, the tafsir itself might not explain every word and explain what to do with every word. And you pointed to that maybe with terms like salah and zakah, but like the tafsir of Baydawi, would pass over many words and terms which are considered obvious for his readers, and so he doesn't explain them. So to what extent can a translator base their project on a particular tafsir that is like this? And the second problem, along with indeterminacy, is polyvalence. It's that problem of, if the mufassir, himself or him or herself, would express more than one opinion, how is a person supposed to translate if they have more than one option in front of them? So perhaps if you could clarify how Al-Muyassar perhaps goes around these problems, And perhaps you can shed light from your experience as a translator, and I'm sure discussing with other translators in the field, how they have navigated some of these problems if they are basing their work on a specific tafsir, be Al-Muyassar or something else. So I'll end my comments there and pass back to you.
Thank you so much. That's really quite a good question, and answering is not so easy task, because what I would like to start probably from the second question. This is about the like selection of the meanings. Why do we have this translation especially useful for translation into, let it be said, Muslim languages? I mean the languages with a lot of the Arabic terms inside. For example, when we are translating into, let it be said, Tajik or Azerbaijani or even Turkish language, you can just transliterate some terms from Tafsir Al-Muyassar, like they made with this one, Yukshafu Sakin. Yeah, the same. They can just make it Sok, wa Inkashef, or some other word can be used. And in a commentary, you don't need to have any like selection of the meanings, like what is Rajih, what is Marjuh, just making a transliteration. So this is, we see the Kiswahili language, a Tagalog language. I'm not sure they have so many Arabic and Persian, of course, like even in Swahili, there are some kind of core vocabulary of Arabic, but well, there's a talk about the dialects and so on. But for the Turkic language especially, this can be useful. But when they will start to translate into English or another Slavic languages like Russian, the problem appears. This is like the problem once I was discussing like the expression "Inna Allahu ma'ana," that example, "Inna Allahu ma'ana," God with us. So I was asked by one of this, so why do you translating God with us without a commentary, as Tafsir Al-Muyassar says, God with us by his knowledge? I said, because we have such an expression in Ukrainian, in Russian, in English, God with us. Everyone knows that it doesn't mean that the God is next door physically or something like that. He says, no, because for the Arabic mind, it should be added, God with us, by ilmi, but not by his physical presence. So there should be an interpolation and so on. So this is a problem, that we have some expression, we have another tradition anyway in English, in German, in other languages, tradition of Bible translation, and some of the expression could be used. But here, for this case, this tafsir could be quite useful for making a transliteration, even when talking about the verse of 551, yeah, that Awliya, yes, about Jews and Christians. Yeah, so they use the word Ansar and the word Khulafa, meaning like the alliance, and meaning the assistants or helpers. But if you will make any kind of translation into the English or German or any European language, there is a question how to translate this word Ansar from this tafsir in this context of Awliya. So does it provide for us a very clear meaning, very clear picture? I'm sure not. But if someone is making translation into like a Central Asian, Turkic language, more than like Turkmen, Uzbek, less than Kazakh or even Kazan Tatar language, so there could be another question. So this is why the tafsir is probably seems to be limited to their like a translation into the languages with the Muslim audience, maybe 90-95% of Muslim audience. When coming into European language, I see this is when you have some of the like providing a first translation, or we have some that the languages where just a few translations existing, or just one, or maybe incomplete translations. This could be a real problem. So I completely agree that this makes like the singularity or this like a simple tafsir, not the polyvalence, but just one meaning provided for the reader. It can make things difficult, not easy for the translator. So Still, it's interesting to trace which new translation will appear and how do they will use it. But Ibn Taymiyyah is mentioned, just reminding to the first, Ibn Taymiyyah is mentioned in the very beginning, like saying, oh, this tafsir is made on the manhaj of Ibn Taymiyyah, like a symbolic mention of him. But in reality, I think you compared one case. I think if some of any cases compared, I'm not sure that Ibn Taymiyyah's opinion was not the first one. Probably Ibn Kathir or even as-Sa'di, already reading Ibn Kathir and Al-Baghawi and Tabari, was there. For me, the most of the more like the tafsir with many parallels with this one, or the main source for Tafsir Al-Muyassar was still Tafsir Al-Sa'di, Abdurrahman Al-Sa'di. But probably here he was like improve it, make even more simple, make even more single in meanings. I mean, Tafsir Al-Muyassar, like a abridged or maybe edited version on the basis of Al-Sa'di Tafsir.
Yeah, that's a really useful response, and I really like the point that you made about how things are written in a sense with the Arabic logic, right? So in the logic of Arabic writers and readers, so that really does raise a question on the utility of translating tafsir at all, which is a problem I face all the time when you've got one term and then what's supposed to be a synonym for it in Arabic itself. It's a gloss in Arabic. As a translator, which word are you supposed to be translating, and how are you inserting yourself, as in a separate language? So yeah, I see the point that some languages, so-called Islamic languages, that are carrying a lot of these same Arabic terms, it becomes more straightforward. So thanks very much for your talk and your discussion and response. And I'm sure everyone will agree that it's been most interesting. And in a moment, we're going to pass over to questions.